For most of those young people who are learning about America in our public schools, they hear of us as a racist, imperialist, corrupt, flawed nation. But you're on fire with love for America. Say more about what you love about America.
Because it's a moral country, first of all. I think it's the most moral country on the face of the earth, because it is an unprecedented phenomenon in the sense that when you look at the histories of other countries, they're predicated on lineage, they're predicated on tribalism. This is a great social experiment in which America said, come to our shores, and the criterion for belonging does not rest on blood, it does not rest on tribal affiliation, it does not rest on ethnicity, it does not rest on nationality, it does not even rest on religious affiliation. Quite the opposite, it rests on an escape from religious affiliation or religious persecution. I have studied world history very, very carefully because it's part of what I do for a living, and it's part of what I do as a religious geek, as a hobby. And when I read the history of human civilizations and I look at American history, I think that this social experiment boggles the mind, that we could have a nation that says, you are free to come here and become a citizen. And our citizenship is not based on ethnic or blood nationalism. It is based on something called civic nationalism, where what you do is you pledge a very thin allegiance to the political principles, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian or an atheist. There are a set of political principles that give this country, that give our great republic, its constitutive identity. And your tribal loyalties, whether you're Polish, whether you're black, whether you're African, Caribbean, Korean, those loyalties cannot supersede and trump the political principles that give coherency to this republic. You don't necessarily renounce where you come from, but you cannot have those loyalties supersede the principles that give coherency to this country. And that's all that we ask of you. We don't ask that you give up privately speaking your language in your household. We don't ask that you renounce your ancestry. We just ask that you assimilate to certain American practices, mores, norms. I think that's one of the reasons I love America, because I think that is the most inviting country that I've ever seen existing on the face of the earth. America is a moral nation. It was founded in moral principles. And it is the first nation. I've read world history and world civilization pretty well. And to the best of my knowledge, I think part of what makes this nation great is that it is the first nation that was founded consciously, a consciously founded nation in moral principles. That's the first founding. And we've had many, many incarnations. The Civil War was the second founding, I think. And the Civil Rights Movement, I think, was a third founding, in which we applied political solutions to moral problems. The other reason that I really, really love America is that it's an aspirational country. It's a country that I think gives you what I call the chance to start metaphysically clean from scratch. That is, no matter where you come from. That is, I had a friend that I write about in my forthcoming book, who was an untouchable in India. In India, he would never have been able to make it. He was from the lowest caste system and came to America, was a Dalit, an untouchable, sweeping the floors, was so low that people didn't even want to step on the earth on which he had trod. Came to the Deep South in 1986. Nobody knew what the hell an untouchable was, didn't care, and went on to become an architect. America says, we don't care where you came from. We don't care about your background. All we care about is where you're heading and what you can make of your life, the choices that you make in your life. You possess the virtues of grit, honor, tenacity, resilience. Do not come here with an entitlement attitude, which I love. The country owes you nothing but an opportunity to pursue your goals. which in and of itself is a gift, because immigration is not a right, it's a privilege. No one has an innate right to come here. It's not a constitutional right that you have to come here. It's a gift, a privilege that the country has granted you. Which is another reason I love America, because it's given this enormous gift, this benevolent gift. Now, to speak personally about the American people, I find them, having lived in Europe for a year, having had, through my work, the privilege of traveling to over 45 countries, I find the American people to be my most, let's not say among, my favorite people in the world. They're cheerful, they're optimistic, they're compassionate, they're the most giving people. I read a survey that stated something on the order that compared to Europeans, Americans are the most philanthropic people in the world. They're compassionate, they're benevolent, they have a can-do spirit, they are not bitter, they're not fatalistic, they're not deterministic, they pick themselves up, they start from scratch, they have an extraordinary capacity to solve problems. America is a problem-solving country. We are a reformed society in the sense that we take problems and we're not ever satisfied with those problems, whether those problems are race-related problems, whether they're problems having to do with sexism, whether they're problems that have to do with social issues. We put them on the plate and we say, how can we solve these problems? We are a reformed society. We're always, the far left likes to talk about itself as being progressive. But America by nature is a progressive society. When you look at how far we have come in 248 years, it boggles the mind. When you look at ancient Egypt, that lay stagnant for 1,000 years, when you look at the Chinese dynasties, when you look at medieval Europe, when you look at Europe in general, and how stagnant those civilizations have been for centuries, and you look at how far we have come in solving some of our seemingly intractable problems in so short a time. I just saw the movie LBJ, and looking at the civil rights movement, and having lived in the Deep South for 8 years when I first came to America, and looking at how far we have come in terms of race relations. And I would challenge anyone, no one has ever come close enough to challenge me on this, because they can't, because I'm a living embodiment of this. I lived in Atlanta in 1985 when I came here, and this is 2017, and I have seen the marked improvement in race relations. People who say today, oh, race relations have gotten worse and they've deteriorated, I say that's a bunch of malarkey. I have taught in 5 different universities. I've taught students in the cornfields of, all white students in the cornfields of Southern Illinois, at Purdue University, and I have seen the marked improvements in race relations in this country, where in 1952, something like 4% of white Americans approved of interracial marriages, and in the 2000 Pew report and the Gallup report that I remember seeing in 2013, something like 87% of white Americans approve of interracial marriages between blacks and whites. I mean, we could go on for hours and I could write a book about. It's one of the things that brings a huge smile to my face when I talk about why I love America, but these are just some of the reasons why.
Explain why it's so offensive to white liberals in particular if you or others who are black say you're not a victim, or women or minorities.
Because I think a lot of people on the far left suffer from what I call annihilation anxiety. That is, their entire existence is predicated on black victimization and suffering. And there's a kind of moral sadism that's associated with that. If my emancipation as a black person rests in my hands, and I will not allow you to expropriate my creative agency on behalf of my life, and if the purpose and meaning of your existence relies on emancipating me from my suffering and my victimization, then I've basically eradicated your purpose and your meaning from your life. If your purpose and meaning and existence in life rests on relieving black suffering, and blacks say, no, I'm sorry, My creative agency lies in my hand. I really don't need you. I can cultivate certain character traits. I can cultivate excellence in my character. I don't need you to expropriate my agency and take care of myself. I can do so myself. I've basically annihilated your existence by taking away the purpose and meaning of your life, which means I've shorn up a sort of hypocrisy. If your existence is predicated on relieving my suffering, you need me to suffer indefinitely. And that's a really, really bad thing.
Has this happened in your life with anyone in particular? Have you tried this out?
It's happened several times in graduate school, in my professional life, where I've said, look, I really don't need your help. I just need you to stay out of my way. Don't place any obstructions in my path. Please don't block my efforts to enhance my life. I don't have a victim story. I'm not a victim. I never will be a victim, because I don't configure my life in such a way in which a victim identity constitutes part of my literal identity. There might be cases if I'm robbed, if I'm subject to forms of injustice, I might be in a local sense a real victim, but that doesn't mean that that becomes a constitutive feature of my identity. It means I solve a problem and I move on and I move outside the realm of that particular local victim status and inhabit my larger humanity.
So in your writing, you talk about the alt-left. Who are those people? Name some names, and what's their agenda?
I think we're seeing a movement that is quite insidious and whose members have assumed a position of complete infallibility on their part and arrogance, and feel that their position, their doctrinary position, is the correct one. So where it probably started out as whether one agrees with this or not, more local goals like we should have a $15 an hour minimum wage, we should have free health care for everyone. Those things are debatable, those things are understandable. It's spawned into a set of very ugly and I think very un-American set of goals. I mean, when you start accusing Israel, which I think is the most beleaguered country on the planet, as an apartheid genocidal state, there is no lower place to go in terms of intellectual obscenity, I think, in this country. The ramifications of the alt-left, I find, is taking ascendancy among the professoriate in the classrooms in terms of how classes are being taught and how certain viewpoints that are outside the ambit or outside the scope of that particular ideology gets squashed. And one particular example that I can point to would be the free speech movement. So when we have people like a conservative writer like Charles Murray, when we have even someone like Condoleezza Rice, who is classified as a hate speaker, Christina Hoff Sommers, who is a dissident feminist, who's met with the kind of vitriol where she has to walk with bodyguards sometimes on campuses because people on the alt-left feel that any position that doesn't align itself with theirs constitutes hate speech. I think the name was coined by the center-left Democrats to paint Bernie Sanders as a kind of, or the Bernie bros, as they called him, as a kind of fringe movement within the Democratic Party. I think if you look really, really carefully at what we can call the alternative left, I think they existed around the time of the Occupy movement. I would probably formally locate their instantiation around that time. And I think that paradoxically they probably existed for the same reason that other movements arose, such as the Tea Party, out of a discontent with what was going on with the establishment in Washington. But I think they, in some sense, morphed into something more nefarious. I would include Bernie Sanders, the Bernie Sanders movement, as part of the alternative left. In terms of intellectuals, for example, I would include people like Cornel West, who has gone from someone, when I knew him 25 years ago, when I was in graduate school, a very seasoned, respectable scholar, to someone who has become someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates, whom I would also include as a member of the alt-left. I mean, he says that the revolution is here in an article recently. I don't know what revolution he's talking about. The revolution occurred in 1776. I think the Black Lives Movement would be part of what we could characterize as the alt-left, a movement that I think started out with very, very strategically legitimate concerns about a spate of police brutalities against unarmed black men, but a movement that has strayed outside of its lane and is now accusing Israel of, has gone way beyond the purview of its original charter, and is asking for free education for all blacks, the breaking up of banks, accusing Israel of being a genocidal apartheid state, also demanding votership rights for illegal immigrants.
So the New York Times has described Ta-Nehisi Coates as the preeminent black public intellectual of his generation. Now, why did you take on this man in Commentary magazine as you did about his book, Between the World and Me? And what kind of reaction have you had for doing that?
Well, I took him on because I thought that he was stating a number of issues and a number of viewpoints that were just blatantly false about America. The first one was that he was painting America in no uncertain terms as a white supremacist country. And I thought that that was just a very nefarious lie, that we do not have an official ideology in this country that paints the white race as a superior race anymore. That's just a nefarious lie. So America is not, most emphatically, a white supremacist country. And I took him on because he was painting the American dream as something that was inimical to the dreams of black people. He painted the American dream as something outside the ambit of the aspirations of people of color, of black people. The American dream was the fabrication of white people who had built it on the backs of black people. And I thought that the way that he had constructed the American dream as being something evil, something racist, constitutively racist, was a lie, that it was empirically false, that when you look out at the American landscape and you see the millions of people, black, white, immigrants, who are aspiring to the American dream, that this is just something quite fallacious. But it's more than fallacious, it's nefarious. Because what he's doing is he's trying to, in some sense, spit in the face the heartbreaking aspirations of millions of people who aspire to, in their own small ways and in their own grand ways, a piece of the American dream. If you spit in the face of the American dream, I think you spit in the face of a constitutive part of what constitutes the American identity. The second reason I took on Ta-Nehisi Coates is because I spotted something that I think is very, very bad that is going on in the American Academy, in America in general. That is, there's, at the heart of his article, anti-Americanism, a great deal of hatred for America, for being America. And as someone who loves this great republic, I loved it before I came here. I came here because I loved it. I couldn't sit with this. I said something has to be done. If there is one single voice that has to take this man on and show the American people that this is a great republic, the American dream is alive and well, there are millions of people who are catching it, living it in small doses, in great, great, magnificent ways, then it has to be done. There are very few things that make me angry as I get older, and I don't think I have a capacity for bitterness. But one thing that makes me very, very, very angry is when I hear invectives spewed against America. And I saw that being exhibited in this article.
I've heard you say that it's child abuse for parents or people to give that book to their children.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a form of child abuse or child neglect, because I think what the book does is that it inundates them with a great deal of lies about the country in which they live. It tells them that America is a white, imperialist, racist country that is constructed primarily to oppress minorities, that America is not a country that is what I would call a country that is always widening the pantheon of the human community to include, in the domain of the ethical, persons who were previously excluded. And so it paints a very false picture of who and what America is and what America is continuously becoming. We are a nation that is reflective. We're a nation that is always striving to become better. We're a nation that has at its heart a self-reflexivity clause. And when you spew anti-Americanism, you fail to give your young people an opportunity to inoculate themselves against the threats against America. And there are many, many threats, both within this country and outside this country. When you make them ashamed of this country, you basically make them non-immune to the threats that we are facing and are going to face in no uncertain terms. So I think Ta-Nehisi Coates has given us a recipe for self-hatred and a recipe for self-denigration, when what we should be feeling is pride in our great nation. Not a sort of mindless flag-waving pride, but a kind of rational pride where you know that the pride that you feel is in the funds. And I think he wants to sweep under the rug the great founding moments in this country's history, in which we've made three, at least to my counting, three great, not political, but three great moral revolutions in this country.
What do you think are the biggest threats to our nation?
There are two major threats to our nation. One is external and one is internal. So let me speak about the external threat. I think we face very serious external threat from radical Islam, which I don't think should be downplayed at all. I think we're seeing the Islamicization of Europe. In 20 years' time, Europe will be completely unrecognized. It won't be the Europe that we know. There might just be a caliphate in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. I think we face a grave threat from a nuclearized Iran. And I do not think that Russia is, or I'm writing a book on American foreign policy right now, one of two books. One is on American foreign policy, and I think Russia poses a great threat, as does Iran. Of course, North Korea has to be dealt with very, very seriously. I think the internal threat that we face is this growing anti-American sentiment that I see infecting our young people. Our young people are growing soft, overly sentimental. They find it easier to extend their sympathies to anyone but an American. They would rather feel sorry for someone who is overtly anti-American, such as a Palestinian terrorist, than they would for a bona fide average American. And I think when that happens, that becomes very dangerous, because we ideologically, morally, and politically will begin the process of non-inoculating our young people for fighting the battles that we face. The kids in the classroom that I face are not tough enough to fight these battles that we are going to have to face. They are soft. It is quite possible that in the wars that are going to be inflicted on us by our enemies, that something like Dresden or Hiroshima might have to be revisited, and we're going to have to be tough in our resolve. We might have to fight very, very serious wars in the future. And the threat that we face from within is that America is a bad, evil, mean-spirited country. And I think that there are people in this country who would rather see America go down. Americans who would rather see America be destroyed, and who are rooting for the enemy. And that, I think, is one of the biggest threats that we face within.
So from your years of teaching, what are the solutions that you have come up with that you think could solve some of the academic bias and propaganda and problems you're seeing?
I think we have to have real intellectual diversity in the classroom. I think the tenure system and that we have right now, or the kind of complete ultra left-wing orthodoxy in which alternative viewpoints, and by alternative viewpoints I mean conservative viewpoints, liberal conservative viewpoints, ultra conservative viewpoints, need to have a fair hearing. If you are in the university and you are espousing capitalism, free market enterprise, the free market enterprise system, individualism, self-reliance, anything that smacks of conservatism, you're shouted down, right? So I think that we need to have real intellectual diversity in the humanities and in the social sciences. I think the complete coercive monopoly of left-wing ideology that has taken root in the classrooms, in our academies, have got to be challenged.
What's your next project, and where can people find out more about you?
My next project is a book that I have called We Have Overcome, an immigrant's letter to the American people, that you should, by the time your program airs, it should be up on Amazon for pre-sale publication. It's a love letter to the American people. It's a love letter to my adopted, beloved country, and it extols the virtues of this great country and shows all the reasons why America is the country that it is, a great and wonderful country. It identifies the moral meaning of America and rescues from the detractors of the American dream the lies that they have foisted on the American people, and really shows what this great country is about. I've also started an institute called the Institute for Immigrant Assimilation, which is not yet up and running, but something that the American people should look towards, about how to assimilate the legal immigrants that we have in our country. And people can find me on Twitter and befriend me on my Facebook at Dr. Jason Hale on Facebook, and on my DePaul University webpage.